Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Everything's going well. Ramadan has been an incredible experience so far. This is I think I might have mentioned this on the previous one. This is the first Ramadan where uh, my main focus hasn't just been a lack of food or an excess of food. Right. So, alhamdulillah, like, because I became Muslim probably about 4 or 5 years ago now. The
MashaAllah.
first 2 or 3 Ramadans were like really tough, really,
Yeah.
really tough. But alhamdulillah, that's the way it goes.
Yeah, I'll make it easy for you, inshallah.
Ameen, Ameen. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Today, a friendly face, Sheikh Ahmed Metwalli. How are you doing, Sheikh? Are you, everything okay?
Alhamdulillah, everything's well. Jazakumullah khair.
That's good to hear. Barakallahu feek. Sheikh, after the last conversation we had, I spent a good bit of time kind of pondering over the things that we discussed. So I know there's probably a lot of people that had that experience. So Jazakallah khair for your last reminder. I think as far as the format, nothing really much has changed. We just hand over to you, and I'm here. I've kind of figured this out now. I'm here as the litmus test. If things get too academic beyond my comprehension, that's when I get involved. Outside of that, I'm just here to enjoy as a student.
As you try to bring it down a little bit.
Naam, yes, yeah. So if I say, what do you mean by that? They make it simpler, then you know that it's not because anybody else has asked, it's because myself, I don't understand it. But
Allah give you barakah, inshallah, and increase your knowledge, inshallah.
Ameen, Ameen. Barakallahu feek, Sheikh. Bismillah, it's in your hands.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So I want to start today by quoting one of the hadith that was narrated by Imam Abu Dawood and Imam Tirmidhi and Nisa'i and Imam Ahmed rahimahullah. And this was the hadith by Abu Hurairah where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam described the creation of Jannah and then the creation of the hellfire, right? And it mentions, it goes along the lines that, the Prophet ﷺ said that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first created the Jannah, he told Jibreel to go look at it, right? And Jibreel alayhi salam, he did go and look at it, and he came back and he said, Ay Rabb, wa izzatik, right? He said, oh my Lord, with your izzah, no one will hear of it except that they will enter it, right? Naturally speaking, because even in the descriptions of the Quran and the Sunnah of how beautiful Jannah is, the palaces and whatever is being prepared from the different rivers and the enjoyment of sitting there and the palaces and everything that anyone would desire. When the Prophet ﷺ said in it, there is مَا لَا عَيْنُ رَأَتْ وَلَا أُذُنٌ سَمِعَتْ وَلَا خَطَرَ عَلَى قَلْبِ بَشَرٍ. In it there is what an eye has not seen or ear has heard or even came across your thoughts or your heart. And so naturally Jibreel said there's no one's going to hear of it except they'll enter it. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what he did was ثُمَّ حَفَّهَا بِالْمَكَارِ, right? He surrounded this Jannah with dislikes. Right? Makari is the things that we dislike or we don't like. And so then he told Jibreel to go look at the Jannah again. And he went and he came back and he said, oh my Lord, with your izzah, I'm afraid that no one will enter it. Okay. And then subhanahu wa ta'ala, he created the hellfire and he told Jibreel to go look at it. And he looked at it, Jibreel alayhi salam, and he came back and he said, oh my Lord, with your izzah, no one will hear of it and will enter it, which is very natural when we hear the description of the punishment of the hellfire, the heat of it, and the different torments associated with it forever. And there's actually they're constant pain because your nerves of your skin will be replenished all the time as they burn and so forth. No one in their sound mind would say, hey, I would like to go there, right?
No.
It doesn't work that way. And so naturally, this is something that we don't want to be in. And so this Jibreel made that comment based on that. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surrounded Jannah with desires. And he told Jibreel, go take a look at it. And when Jibreel took a look at it, he came back, he said, wa izzatak, with your izzah, I'm afraid that there will be no one left except they would enter it.
Sheikh, real quick, you said surrounded Jahannam with desires.
Jahannam with desires.
SubhanAllah, okay.
And so this there's a shorter hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim by Abu Hurairah where the Prophet said, حُجِبَتِ النَّارُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ حُجِبَتْ الْجَنَّةُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ وحجبت النار بالشهوات. right? Or it's actually the reverse. It's حفت النار بالشهوات حجبت النار بالشهوات وحجبت الجنة بالمكاره, which means over here حجبت means concealed, like it's a barrier. It comes from the word hijab,
Mhm.
right? Hijab is like what is concealed, so it's like a form of
It's
a
a common,
barrier.
yeah.
So the hellfire was concealed or surrounded, was concealed with desires, and Jannah was concealed with dislikes. But essentially, that means is that for a person to penetrate into Jannah, to penetrate that, to get to Jannah, they need to penetrate that barrier, which is the dislikes. Right?
Mm.
And what are those dislikes? Essentially, they are the obligations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had placed on us, the prohibitions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed on us. Those are the dislikes, because it has a
Mhm.
level of in Arabic it's called taklif. Taklif, which is an obligation, responsibility, something you have to do. And so you have to carry yourself on to do it, carry yourself to do that. As when it
Mhm.
comes to the hellfire, the way to enter the hellfire is to break the barrier of desires. So when
Mm.
you indulge in those desires and you let your nafs be carried away with it, regardless whether it's halal or haram, it makes no difference. But just crossing that bridge is how you get to the hellfire, right? Um, and so this hadith, like I'm using it as a platform, is because an important component of understanding this hadith is understanding the nature of our nafs.
Mhm.
Right? And our nafs naturally is inclined to laziness. Right? I don't think you hear anybody, hey, I'm excited, I'm gonna go to work. Right? I'm so excited to go to work. And I just remembered I I used to always ask my father, how's work? Right? He would say, Alhamdulillah. Right? And every time I see him when I go visit, I say, how's work? He would say, Alhamdulillah. And then at one point he's like, what do you want me to say? It is work, right? Work is work. Who likes to go to work? Right? But it's you feel like it's an obligation necessity. So,
Mhm.
but if you could, anybody in this world would desire to sit there, do nothing, and have some sort of like a cash flow to them so that they would just relax. So our nafs
Mhm.
is prone to laziness. This is
Yeah.
why, when it comes to prayer, sometimes you find that we drag our feet to it. Right?
Mhm.
But also the other part of our nafs is that it always loves or likes to indulge in what it desires.
Mhm.
It's very easy for it to indulge in desires. It has no problem spending hours with friends and companions. Has no problem sitting hours in some sort of like screen or entertainment. Whatever enjoyment it brings to it, you find that it's so easy and simple, right?
And there's
And so
very little effort needed to attain your
exactly,
desires,
there's
right? You
very
don't
little.
have to work to, yeah.
Yeah, it's very little effort, right? Even even sports, whatever it is, as long as the nafs desires it, the desire, it becomes very easy. Like you
Mhm.
indulge in it. And of course, I just limited it over here to the halal desires. But what's worse now is you bring in the impermissible forms of desires. The nafs would enjoy that, right? But
Mhm.
it's in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom that He placed boundaries for us because it's for our own good and our protection. Because He subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that created us. And so He placed the rules and regulations for us that would bring about the best for us in this world and the hereafter, and keep away from us or reduce the harm that might happen in this world or the hereafter. This is the whole concept of Sharia, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated for us. And so this is why we understand if something's haram, it's definitely bad for us, either in long term or the short term, in this world
Mhm.
or in the hereafter. So if you understand those two components and the fact that the shaitan always works on the shahawat aspect, the desires, right? It brings it to, and kind of also works on the other side of not liking to do things, do it tomorrow, right? Not
Mhm.
necessarily like, okay, fine, do it quickly. If you're gonna pray your salah, just just knock it out and go do whatever you have to do, right?
Mhm.
If you put it this way, you'd understand why it might be difficult to enter Jannah and why it might be easy to enter the hellfire,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
unless you have what is called self-control, right?
Mhm.
Unless you struggle and tame your nafs. That is the key to this, right? The key for us to enter that Jannah and stay away from the hellfire is all about mujahadat al-nafs. Right? There's a whole thing about the struggle against the self. And as long as the shaitan exists and he plays on those matters, then this aspect of mujahadat al-nafs is a lifelong process. right?
Sheikh, you say mujahadath an-nafs. Obviously, look, when we look at the word jihad, it has these connotations to the lay Muslims. We see it as like not we don't see it as a struggle. We see it as like a fight almost. You have to turn up like a soldier. Would you say this applies to the nafs as well?
Well, the word jihad in its basic terminology, it means to exert your your effort, but not just regular effort,
Mm-hmm.
like your utmost or most amount of effort that you can exert. Right.
Okay.
This is what the basic meaning of jihad means, is the aspect of struggle. And so when it's mentioned in terms of jihad is in the battlefield, this is what it is. Like you're struggling, right,
Mm.
against
Yeah, I
the
see.
you're protecting your land. You're struggling against the enemies that you're fighting on the battlefield. You're exerting you're exerting your life, your wealth, and struggling for the sake of
Your
Allah
utmost
Ta'ala.
strength.
And
Okay.
when it comes to the nafs, right, when it comes to nafs, it is your struggle to control your nafs, to overpower it. So it doesn't take
Mm-hmm.
control of you; you take control of it. And the whole basic thing, we all alhamdulillah, it comes from the Quran, right? قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, He has succeeded the one that purified it. That whole tazkiyah, and that requires, that struggle with the nafs. وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Disgrace is the one that dassaha, which means that it kind of buried it. Essentially, let it do whatever it wants until it buried itself. Um, and so that's some that's a concept that's very very important. But we also have to be careful. We don't fall into this trap to think that we don't need to do this this aspect of mujahadat nafs, right? To struggle against, to
Mm-hmm.
control ourselves, to tame it. It's an error, right? And it's actually could be our downfall. The minute that we think I'm good, there are a lot of people who are worse than I am. Right? Because then when this happens, you feel content, and when you feel content, you'll never progress and elevate. And without that whole process of mujahad al-nafs, the only way going is down. That's it.
I suppose also there's a risk of not guarding yourself, right?
Yes,
Once you let down the defenses, you think,
yes,
I'm in a good place. I don't need to worry about if I'm wasting my time or doing this. There are people much worse than me.
yes,
And then
yes.
this is I see.
This is
It
why
comes
we
at a
keep.
form of overconfidence almost.
Well, unfortunately, it is. Yes, you feel like I'm good because what you're looking at is looking. Don't feel like you're looking like may Allah correct all of us. You're looking at people who drink
I
alcohol, commit major sins. You're like, I don't do any of these, right? But if you let your guard down, the only way to go down is the only way to go is downwards, even if it takes a
yeah.
long time.
Hmm.
Um, Now, there's many men. I'm going to mention one thing from the pious predecessors. For example, Hassan al-Basri, which is the great tabi'i, he said a very interesting statement. He said, "Mad dabbatul jamuh," right? There isn't a mount that is more defiant or more rebellious, that requires bihawj min al-jam, that requires more restraint. When you restrain a horse, more restraint than yourself, your nafs. Right? And because they understood the nature of it, right? Inclination to laziness and following the shahwat, right?
Mm.
Now, why am I mentioning all this? Because subhanallah, by the way, this is I mentioned the aspect of the shahwat, but also there's the aspect of ibadat, to force yourself to do ibadat. When one of the companions asked the Prophet ﷺ, when he told him ask something, he said, "I ask your your company in Jannah." And so the Prophet ﷺ said, "أعني على نفسك بكثرة الصلاة." Help me by increasing the amount of kathrat sujud, which is increasing the amount of sujud, which is prayers. And so he's telling him strive right towards the acts of worship. So now you're forcing yourself to do things. Now the reason I'm mentioning this, by the way, is because there is a very beautiful relationship between Ramadan and mujahadat nafs.
Okay.
Those two aspects of our self, right? The whole thing about needing to push ourselves to do what we have to do and holding back from the shahwat. Right? So our self is lazy, you want to push it to work, and it wants a desire, you want to restrain it. And both, subhanAllah, are present in Ramadan, and the environment is created for that. So, for example, when you're pushing yourself to overcome its dislikes, we have the extra tarawih that we do, the recitation of the Quran, the dua, the patience with fasting, and so forth. That is you pushing yourself to say no, I need this, right? I'm gonna do this, right? You're controlling that. At the same time, you are preventing yourself from the basic desires, the food, the drink, the relationship with spouses, And then in addition to that, you want to protect your fast, so you stay away from things that are haram. So you prove to yourself, and there's like a 30-day training process that you can do this in Ramadan, which means you can do it out of Ramadan.
Na'am.
But that struggle is there. Now, the beauty of Ramadan also that it adds another component which is necessary to succeed in this whole aspect is patience. Right? We'll never succeed in doing those two things of controlling the nafs, like pushing it to do the work and holding back from the desires, unless we're patient. And there's like, it reminds me of the beautiful advice that the Prophet ﷺ had given Allah ibn Abbas, and this is a variation of the narration, and this is mentioned in Imam Tirmidhi. The Prophet ﷺ told him, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ فِي الصَّبْرِ عَلَى مَا تَكْرَهُ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Know that, be aware and know that with being patient upon what you dislike, there's a lot of good. Right? This is the advice of the Prophet.
Being patient upon what you dislike. There's a specific focus here on what you dislike.
Yes, the things that you dislike, right? Like, carry yourself on it. Right? And that's the whole aspect of discipline, right? Discipline is not doing and being punctual what you like. Discipline is when you control yourself and do the things you don't like. Right?
No.
I'm going to mention one last thing because I think we're running out of time over here. Is that like, there's inshallah like a third component also in Ramadan that helps is that whole concept of accountability. Right? Because we always have to assess ourselves. How are we doing? Are we doing okay? Right? Am I pushing myself enough for the the ibadat without burning myself out? Am I controlling my shahwat or am I indulging in it? Right? And we will have our good days and our bad days. Right? It's a lifelong struggle. Right? And one of the pious predecessors, he mentioned that. He said, I was talking there's nothing more difficult upon me than struggling with myself. A day for me and a day for it. Right? That's the nature of it. You'll have your ups and your downs, but patience and consistency and accountability. In Ramadan, we naturally have that accountability. For example, when we have goals and read of the Quran, right? You're like, did I read my juz today? Or I gotta make it up tomorrow? Or did I did I do something that would affect the reward of my fast today? That natural accountability is also another component. And subhanAllah, when I talk about Mujahadat Nafs, this is one of the best months to practice this, right? So that later on, we will be able to kind of inshallah carry on and be in a better state.
Inshallah. Sheikh, I appreciate this reminder today. It's something interesting that you acknowledge these things that are happening in Ramadan that are very much evident in our day-to-day life, right? We all go through the existence of needing to restrict that in which we need to be restricted in and encourage ourselves to do more. I feel like it's just so much more tangible in Ramadan because you have the structure, the days of fasting, a certain amount of time frame that you have to do tarawih, this kind of thing. Outside of Ramadan, what's your advice? If someone wants to be a bit more aware and be more intentional with their actions to try and encourage themselves to do good and to restrict themselves from evil, what would your advice be in like a day-to-day sort of scenario?
So one of the best things to do is to try to maintain some of the things that we did in Ramadan, for example, right? Not to let it go, because remember, these acts of worships that we do benefit our spirituality, like hugely, right? It increases our iman, and so maintaining some of those acts of worship is key, right? Like maintaining at least a level of reading the Quran every day, maintaining a fasting a few days every month. Maintaining a prayer at night that we do, even if it's 2 rakats, right? Just maintaining some of those will be of a great help to do that, because you tend to stay away from those things. But also in terms of most people, alhamdulillah, I find a lot of people, they try to reduce from the social media, reduce from distractions, and so maintain some of that, maintain some of those, reducing those things. In addition to that, being with a jama'ah helps a lot.
Of course.
Being with a jama'ah. So going to the masjid as much as we can, right? That helps. That environment is an amazing environment. It's a purifying environment that we need. And so this would also help some aspect. And then definitely the type of company that we have, the type of friend that we have. They usually say, you should have take somebody with you on that journey to so you can support one another. That whole idea is correct. That companionship along the road to Jannah, or along the road to the Islamic knowledge, or whatever it is, somebody so you can reinforce one another. So when you fall back, they encourage you to move forward, and when they fall, you carry them. And so those are a few things here and there that would help. But most importantly is dua. The dua is that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep you on that straight path. Right? You ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep increasing your iman. And that is the most powerful thing. as long as there's a dua, you know, one of the companions, he said, inni la, I'm not concerned about the answering of the dua. I'm concerned about making the dua. Right? إني لا أعني هم الإجابة. I don't care that concern of the answer, but I have to make sure that I'm making that dua.
Yeah.
Allah.
Sheikh, this is all very helpful stuff. I appreciate. Is it fair to say then, maybe for a person who is coming out of Ramadan or knows that Ramadan is on its way through, right? If they feel maybe like trying to take on all these things is a bit too much, is it fair to say, look, they maybe can focus on the thing that has the greatest impact on their day-to-day life? For some people, it's like you said, restriction of social media. For some people, it's the fasting. Some people, it's the night prayers, and maybe kind of like isolate that one thing to be able to try and keep it going as a regular routine outside of Ramadan.
So, subhanAllah, by the way, most of us are inclined to one act of worship than another.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's our personality that inclines. Some people, they find themselves in seeking knowledge. Others find themselves in reading Quran. Others find themselves more in siyam or whatever the case is. So whatever we are inclined to of it more, then it's okay to do more of it. But those variations, different acts of worship, are also good. So what I'm suggesting is maintaining like a base level of something, right?
Okay.
So
a base level of variety.
If a person is inclined to read the Quran, then definitely you should try to at least finish the Quran every month. Definitely, right? If that's your inclination. If not, then at least you're reading 1 page to 2 pages a day. Like maintain that connection with your Quran. Right? If a person finds himself in Qiyam, then definitely if you want to pray like 11 rak'ahs with the witr or whatever, how many you want every day, go ahead, right? But still maintain, for example, that fasting 3 days a month, for example, right? Which, if you think about it, it's not that much.
No, it's quite easy. 3 days a month is a small portion compared to what we're facing now.
Theoretically speaking, of course, right?
Yeah,
but
of course.
It becomes difficult because you're doing it by yourself.
Yes, I find that the solo fast the toughest.
Yes.
During Ramadan, it's easy because everyone else is fasting. You have no choice. But when you wake up and you have to say to yourself, I'm going to choose to not eat or drink today, and everyone else is going to do it around me. So, subhanAllah, may Allah make it easy for all of us, because that is another type of challenge. Sheikh, I appreciate the advice. It's very good, and I think it's very easy to get kind of pigeonholed into the thing that I feel like I do best or benefits me the most, and it's not that we neglect the rest of it, but we have a hyper fixation on something that we know does good for us particularly. But this variety, and this kind of balance that you're striking, this is the sort of the benefit of Islam. We are neither extremes. We are people of the middle, right? And to have a balance of everything in your day to day, subhanAllah, it has a big impact. Yes. So I appreciate the advice a lot. Barakallahu feek, Sheikh. Again, just for anybody who's new, who doesn't know the Sheikh, hey Sheikh, where can we find you if we want to study or understand a little bit more about the institutes that you're involved with? Where do we find you to?
So mainly, I guess the quickest way is to kind of hit up the alfalahcenter.org. I do have an Instagram. I don't post a lot of things on there, but if people sometimes want to connect, that can be another way, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah. Everybody, I'm going to put the link up here. There's also a donation link for Al Falah Center. So if you want to support the work that Sheikh Metwalli does, then please donate generously and Allah will give you more in return. Sheikh, barakallahu feek. We ask Allah to keep us sincere on the truth, forgive us for any mistakes. Ameen. Jazakallahu khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.